Good afternoon. The subcommittee will come to order. We meet today to discuss the President's fiscal year 2020 budget, request for military construction, family housing, and base realignment and closure for the Department of Defense. I would like to begin by recognizing today's panel. Today we will hear from representatives of all the military services as well as the Office of the Secretary of Defense. For three of our witnesses, this will be their final appearance in front of our subcommittee before their retirements this summer, which I'm sure you have mixed emotions about being in front of the subcommittee. Joining us are the Honorable Robert McMahon, Assistant Secretary of Defense for Sustainment, Lieutenant General Gwendolyn Bingham, Assistant Chief of Staff of the Army for Installation Management, who is retiring after 38 years of service, and we very much appreciate you. Vice Admiral Dixon R. Smith, Deputy Chief of Naval Operations for Fleet Readiness and Logistics, retiring after 37 years of service. Again, thank you for your service. Major General Vincent Colonese, Commander of the Marine Corps Installations Command and Assistant Deputy Commandant, Installations and Logistics, who is retiring after 36 years of service. And again, we appreciate all of you and all that you represent very, very much. Brigadier General John Allen, Air Force Deputy Chief of Staff for Logistics, Engineering, and Force Protection, and Director of Civil Engineers, who's not retiring. But I also want to thank you for your 27 years of service. The fiscal year 2020 base budget request of $11.2 billion reflects a 9% increase over the fiscal year 2019 enacted level of $10.3 billion. While it's great to see an increase in the MILCON request for the second consecutive year, reversing years of underfunding while simultaneously building ready and resilient installations will remain a challenge. The increased complexity of facilities needed to support today's weapon systems and new platforms is driving complex designs, higher costs, and aggressive construction schedules. Additionally, efforts to support several multi-billion-dollar recapitalization initiatives culminate in large and complex projects taking up a greater share of the budget. We are all aware that this portfolio has been taking on increasing levels of risk for years, and affordability continues to decrease as cost of the construction projects continues to rise. This is evident in this year's request as the top 20% of projects account for half of the budget. The fiscal year 2020 budget request begins to improve our infrastructure, but the total MILCON request is still less than 3% of the total Department of Defense budget. Congress and departments must collaborate to find innovative solutions to deliver facility investments with constrained resources. This is an urgent need given that MILCON not only supports new weapon platforms, but are interdependent on purpose-built infrastructure, but it also provides for hospitals, schools, and housing to improve the quality of life for our service members and their families. To that end, I am pleased that the Office of the Secretary of Defense and the services are developing and implementing efforts on infrastructure management and reform. I look forward to learning more about the services implementing these initiatives and hearing how they will improve existing processes. The fiscal year 2020 Overseas Contingency Operation European Deterrence Initiative request is $645 million, a decrease from the fiscal year 2019 enacted level of $921 million. I would be remiss if I didn't note that the $9.2 billion emergency request to support hurricane reconstruction efforts in the national emergency at the southern border. The damage at Tyndall Air Force Base in Camp Lejeune is truly devastating, and I think we must rebuild in a smart, thoughtful manner as quickly as we responsibly can. I also believe that border security is an urgent need that should be a priority. Clearly, work remains to be done in order to achieve the level of border security that the American people are calling on Congress to deliver, and this will require a whole-of-government effort. I don't think I'm exaggerating if I say the specific request in front of the subcommittee is unprecedented and will spark passionate debate among my colleagues. However, I remain hopeful that the subcommittee can work together in our traditional bipartisan fashion to develop a bill that supports the department and our service members. Before we turn to our witnesses, I would like to recognize my colleague, Senator Schatz, for his opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all of these great public servants on the panel. Reviewing the Defense Department's military construction request for fiscal year 20 means that we're also reconsidering the projects that Congress funded for fiscal 19. We funded those projects because the department asked for them, because you told us that they were necessary. Now, Acting Secretary Shanahan has directed the services to go back and take a second look to see if that is still true. No one has outlined the criteria DOD is going to use to decide what projects to delay or defund to pay for the wall. The department needs to provide specifics on how it will decide which projects are now on the chopping block. And when we finally see the list of projects that DOD is willing to cut for the wall, we need to know how the department decided, because there is a concern that the White House may have promised to protect projects in certain states in exchange for votes by members of this body on the President's emergency declaration. So let's be clear about what will happen if this process remains obscured. If you decide a prior year project is worth cannibalizing to pay for the wall, you also just decided that it's less important than every other project in the FYDP. It falls off for 10 years. That goes for service-specific projects as well as defense-wide agency projects. Additionally, the department is asking us to write a separate check for $3.6 billion to pay for what I'm not entirely sure, and it's not clear the department has fleshed that out either. We have to assume it's to pay for fiscal 20 projects that you're up here defending that may get cut next year for next year's emergency declaration and raid for the border wall. I see no reason to provide that funding. There's also this idea that we will backfill any project that DOD delays to pay for a wall that Congress has already said it won't do. We have to reject this for what it is, an undermining of our constitutional role as appropriators. This committee has a tradition of giving the department flexibility to move money to meet urgent needs, but we will not weaken our oversight by giving you lump sum funding for some unknown purposes, whether it's for border wall construction, hurricane recovery, or housing. If you don't give us more information, we'll be forced to put more restrictions around funds that we appropriate. Every day this goes on, we are seeing the erosion of our trust and confidence that has been part of this committee's work with the department. We get that none of this is your call. You are responding to a policy directive, but you need to know that this whole process and the uncertainty around it has frayed our working relationship. We do need answers, and we expect you to carry the messages you're hearing back to your service chiefs and the acting secretary. Setting aside the border wall, the fiscal year 20 request is largely a good news story. The base budget request recognizes that we badly need to invest in military infrastructure, and you've used less war funds to fund your total requirement. The request includes important improvements to training ranges, piers and wharfs, and airfields. We are also seeing increases across the Guard and Reserve, and I hope the department can continue to build on this. And let me end by recognizing three of our witnesses who are making their last appearance, Lieutenant General Bingham, Vice Admiral Dixon Smith, and Major General Colonnaise. I want to thank you for your decades of service. I want to thank you all for everything you do for our country. I want to especially recognize Dixon Smith, his wife Kiki, their service in Hawaii and our friendship. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. McMahon, I now recognize you for your opening statement.
Chairman Bozeman, Ranking Member Schatz, distinguished members of the subcommittee, on behalf of myself and my service colleagues, thank you for the opportunity to present the President's fiscal year 2020 budget request for the Department's sustainment programs. My written statement has been submitted for the record. As the Assistant Secretary for Sustainment, I focus on supporting the National Defense Strategy through three strategic objectives. First, creating and sustaining resilient installations. Second, ensuring safe places for our members and their families to live, work, play, and pray. And third, enhancing material availability of Department of Defense weapon systems. Our fiscal year 2020 request continues the Department's efforts in achieving these objectives and rebuilding our military into a more capable, lethal, and ready joint force. Our installations are our power projection platforms, and investments in infrastructure, environment, and energy ensure they are ready to support the defense of the nation. We are requesting $21 billion for the military construction and family housing appropriations to construct or acquire facilities needed to bed down new mission capabilities, restore and modernize enduring infrastructure, eliminate those that are excess or obsolete, and begin hurricane recovery. Aside from MILCON, we are requesting $10.4 billion for sustainment and almost $5 billion for restoration and modernization, a 7% and 80% increase over our 2019 request, respectively. While this is a significant improvement, we continue to take risk in these areas. Because we must adapt to a variety of threats and increased installation resilience, we will continue to focus on robust infrastructure, sound land management, increased energy resilience, improving cybersecurity, and the effects of a changing climate. We are also committed to protecting the quality of life for our personnel and their families. Our primary focus here is ensuring access to safe, high-quality, affordable family and unaccompanied housing. To that end, our budget includes $1.3 billion to support our worldwide non-privatized family housing inventory, which includes more than 34,000 government-owned and 7,100 leased units. This request also demonstrates our continuing commitment to modernized unaccompanied personnel housing, with more than $674 million requested for construction and renovation projects supporting more than 3,900 trainees and permanent party personnel. With regard to housing privatization, it was the right thing to do, improving the quality of on-base housing and providing the necessary long-term investment our personnel deserve. That said, recent media coverage reveals deficiencies that we must address. The Department is committed to working with our housing privatization partners and you to provide the best housing possible. Last month, I testified on the potential support the Department of Defense may provide in the construction of a border barrier. This request includes $9.2 billion of emergency funding to restore resources that may be reallocated in fiscal year 2019 should the Acting Secretary of Defense choose to exercise 10 U.S.C. 2808 authority, and for unspecified fiscal year 2020 military construction to build border barriers. Additionally, this amount includes funding to rebuild facilities damaged by Hurricane Florence and Michael. Our 2020 budget also requests $3.6 billion for environmental programs, a $188 million increase over last year's request. This includes $254 million in the BRAC environmental account, focusing on restoration, compliance, and adopting new technologies to reduce cost and accelerating cleanup. Finally, energy is an essential enabler of military capability, and to that end, we are requesting $150 million for the Energy Resilience and Conservation Investment Program to fund projects that improve resilience and security, save energy and water, reduce costs, and most importantly, contribute to our mission readiness. We appreciate Congress's and this subcommittee's continued support as we work together to provide the best support possible to our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines and their families. And I look forward to your questions.
Lieutenant General Bingham.
Thank you, and good afternoon, Chairman Bozeman, Ranking Member Schatz, and distinguished members of this committee. On behalf of over 1 million soldiers and 2.2 million family members serving on installations around the globe, we are grateful for your timely passage of the fiscal year 19 authorization and appropriations bills and for your continued support. Thank you, too, for the opportunity to discuss the importance of installations to Army readiness. Soldier and family housing and quality of life programs are an investment in the Army's most valuable asset, our people. To that end, we remain deeply troubled by the media reports and firsthand accounts from our soldiers and families of poor environmental, health, and safety conditions, as well as poor customer service in Army privatized housing. The Army and CEOs of our privatized housing companies have heard loud and clear that we must do a better job for our soldiers and their families. Soldiers and families who choose to reside on our installations have an enduring right to safe and healthy homes and barracks. The Army completed a 100% review of our total housing inventory, inclusive of government-owned housing, privatized housing, and unaccompanied soldier barracks. We will use the information obtained from these visits and inspections and subsequent ones to continually address all life, health, and safety deficiencies and to improve existing processes and controls for housing oversight. We are enhancing training for our commanders, improving work order tracking processes, conducting quarterly town halls, and implementing accountability in the entire system. This accountability is an enduring mandate and mission. We owe this to our soldiers and their families. Army installations generate, project, and sustain every aspect of combat power. Our military construction budget request for $2.3 billion is aligned with the Secretary of the Army's priorities of readiness, modernization, and reform, with an enduring commitment to caring for our soldiers, civilians, and their families. America's Army stands ready to deploy, fight, and win our nation's wars. With your continued support in providing predictable, adequate, sustained, and timely funding, our installations will remain ready, secure, and resilient, enabling mission readiness and quality of life for soldiers, civilians, and families. Again, thank you for this opportunity to appear before you today. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Vice Admiral Smith.
Thank you, sir. Chairman Bozeman, Ranking Member Schatz, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, I appreciate the opportunity to provide an overview of the Navy's fiscal year 2020 military construction budget request. On behalf of our sailors and their families, thank you for your continued support of the Navy, its military construction program, and our 71 installations around the world which enable the Navy the nation needs. The missions accomplished at and from the shore enable a bigger, better, and more ready Navy as we engage in a great power competition. We undertake a deliberate annual review to prioritize our proposed investments and ensure that we provide the necessary investments to underpin the fleet's mission in support of the National Defense Strategy. The Navy's fiscal year 20 MILCON budget request of approximately $1.5 billion includes 22 projects that will increase lethality and strengthen alliances. The proposed investments deliberately target new platform capability, fielding and employment, recapitalization of waterfront and shipyard infrastructure, foundational warfighting missions, including power projection and shore requirements to maintain our global presence. Additionally, our facilities, sustainment, restoration, and modernization request of $2.3 billion will help to improve sustainment of our most critical facilities. This is the fourth consecutive year Navy has increased FSRM funding. The Navy will begin to reduce the facilities maintenance backlog with the fiscal year 20 budget request, but it will take several years of consistent resourcing to achieve full recovery. Recognizing that shore readiness is an enabler for force generation and critical logistics capabilities to support the fight, our fiscal year 20 request helps to maintain the positive momentum from the 3 previous budget cycles. However, the path to full readiness recovery will take a long-term commitment of resources, predictable funding, and time. It's a privilege to testify before the committee today and share the details of our proposed fiscal year shore investments. Congress is our critical partner to achieve the Navy the nation needs. With stable and predictable funding, we continue to invest smartly, driving efficiency and ensuring the best return on the investment for the nation, our sailors, and civilians. Again, thank you for your support of the Navy shore infrastructure programs, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Major General Colonnaise.
Thank you, sir. Chairman Bozeman, Ranking Member Schatz, and distinguished members of the committee. As the commander for Marine Corps Installation Command, I'm eager to continue to work with you to improve our installation infrastructure. Marine Corps installations represent an invaluable national asset. They're fundamental to combat readiness and to generate combat power. As stated in National Defense Strategy, Our installations are both at stateside and forward deployed are vulnerable to a growing host of sophisticated threats. Mitigating these threats requires continuous support from Congress to strengthen our ability to operate and maintain these assets and to set the condition for future development and the relevance of our installations. Additionally, our installations are home to our Marines, sailors, and families. We must provide safe housing and sufficient community support infrastructure for their well-being. Although Florence hit landfall over 6 months ago, the Marine Corps at Base Camp Lejeune, Marine Corps Air Station New River, and Marine Corps Air Station Cherry Point are still reeling from the impact. The storm was a gut punch. It was the second wettest storm on record. We sustained damage from 35 inches of rain and a hurricane-force wind that was crawling over our base at single-digit miles per hour. Additionally, other Marine Corps regions and installations took a knee on their critical readiness projects that are focused on life, health, and safety as we diverted funds to the affected bases on the East Coast. We're grateful to OSD and Congress for recently approving $400 million in O&M reprogramming for fiscal year 19. This funds will immediately go to recovering operations down at Camp Lejeune. Yet, the money's not enough for this year. We still need to pay back the Marine Corps other installations across the other regions. It will require additional funding in 2019 and the support of Congress. The total hurricane recovery is a cost of $3.7 billion, including 31 replacement projects. The 31 projects will actually replace 133 buildings. That will cost nearly $2 billion to replace. The repairs to the existing buildings will cost $1.3 billion. The remaining $400 million will go towards related equipment. Since the storm, the Marine Corps and Navy Facilities Engineering Command have been driving at the problem shoulder to shoulder and have addressed the immediate life, health, and safety concerns at a cost of about $244 million with our limited operations and maintenance accounts. Marines and sailors are still occupying buildings and homes in need of repairs. Over 3,300 Marines and sailors are displaced across Camp Lejeune area and now are determined to make do in degraded facilities or poorly configured workspaces such as trailers. Due to Hurricane Michael, we have depot-level maintenance facilities exposed to elements at Marine Corps Logistics Base Albany, impacting mission readiness. Over 900 facilities across our East Coast bases have been compromised. 500 of these buildings have been severely damaged and cannot be occupied. Camp Lejeune is home to the 2nd Marine Expeditionary Force and represents over 1/3 of combat power in the Marine Corps. Critical ranges and training areas support 2MEF and the Marine Corps Special Operations Command, and they remain degraded. Damaged infrastructure to roads, railroad trestles, beaches impede our strategic mobility and capacity to deploy. Family housing, both on base and the surrounding community, has been severely impacted. We have Marines executing permanent change station orders to Camp Lejeune this summer, and due to lack of housing, many are making the hard choice to temporarily leave their families behind. Marines are resilient, expeditionary, and adaptable. However, we're going to need some help to keep faith with them and ensure their optimal readiness. The Marine Corps fiscal year 2020 military construction budget includes 18 projects valued at approximately $1.5 billion. It focuses on supporting recapitalization and new platforms and training. The Commandant's infrastructure reset strategy, when properly resourced and implemented, will improve infrastructure lifecycle management. We must prioritize infrastructure reset over the long term. We must improve infrastructure lifecycle management and ensure the infrastructure investments are aligned with the Marine Corps capability-based requirements that support our warfighting mission and contribute directly to the current and future force readiness. The amount of damages these hurricanes cause to our infrastructure cannot be overstated. More importantly, it has impeded our ability to support the mission and the capabilities of Marines and sailors stationed in North Carolina and Georgia. With your continued support, we'll fix these bases while improving the resiliency. Thank you for your time and the opportunity to speak on behalf of the Marines, sailors, and civilians and their families. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Brigadier General Allen.
Thank you, sir. Chairman Bozeman, Ranking Member Schatz, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, I'm honored to appear before you today to represent the Air Force. The Air Force fights from its bases. They serve as our power projection platforms from which we build, deploy, and employ ready forces. Decades of challenging fiscal conditions and global operations have required that we accept managed risk in installation infrastructure, which, left unchecked, will negatively impact Air Force missions. The FY20 President's budget request takes the first steps in a years-long path to recovery to ensure our installations are ready to confront future threats. The result is a budget request aligned with the National Defense Strategy to enhance readiness for the high-end fight. To stabilize and sustain our installations, the Secretary of the Air Force signed the Infrastructure Investment Strategy, which provides a framework for investments in facility sustainment, restoration, modernization, and recapitalization. This strategy is being executed along three primary lines of effort. First, we will restore readiness to our power projection platforms. Second, we will cost-effectively modernize our infrastructure. And third, we'll drive innovation and installation management. Our military construction budget request is a key enabler of the infrastructure investment strategy and has increased by $400 million from fiscal year 19. Aligned with the National Defense Strategy, the MILCON program prioritizes resources to the high-end fight, demonstrates strength to our adversaries and commitment to our allies, and supports global posture through new weapon system bed downs and aging infrastructure recapitalization. In fiscal year 20, the Air Force will leverage MILCON funds to set deterrence conditions in the European theater, enhance partnerships and regional resilience in the Indo-Pacific, and strengthen logistics infrastructure to rapidly support operations in the Levant. Our MILCON request also supports continuing modernization of our aging aircraft fleet, including hangars, maintenance and training facilities, airfields, and fuel infrastructure that aircraft require to achieve full operating capability. Fiscal year 20 MILCON funds will also address urgently needed existing mission recapitalization focused on the nuclear enterprise and research, development, test, and evaluation infrastructure. Equally as vital as the Air Force MILCON budget is the Facility Sustainment, Restoration, and Modernization account, which provides a non-MILCON pathway for mission-critical projects. This year's requested FSRM budget represents a considerable increase over the previous year, setting the stage for consistent, stable, and predictable funding for Air Force installations. In addition to strong installation infrastructure, ready and resilient airmen are critical components of a lethal, powerful Air Force. The Air Force remains committed to providing airmen and their families with quality housing and a sense of community on our installations. The fiscal year 20 President's budget request focuses military family housing funds on eliminating inadequate housing from our government-owned inventory. The fiscal year 20 President's budget request, coupled with the installation investment strategy, invests in a resilient and lethal force ready to fight and win in an era of great power competition. I thank you again for the opportunity to testify today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. General Colonnaise, you testified that over the past 6 months, the Marine Corps has dedicated a significant amount of resources to hurricane recovery for installations at Camp Lejeune, New River, Cherry Point, and Albany, all of which have come from within current funding levels. I guess the question really are two or three things. What impacts are being felt across the Marine Corps due to cash flowing recovery efforts for Hurricanes Florence and Michael? So the cash flow situation, then also what are the operational impacts as a result? And then finally, what impact will those risks have on short-term and long-term funding requirements?
Yeah, Chairman, thanks for the question. Cash flow is seriously impacting the rest of the Marine Corps. So by putting we had to stop the bleeding and make the repairs. If you fly over Camp Lejeune or New River today, it'll look like blue tarps from the sky. So we patched it. We stopped the bleeding. We did our due diligence. 31 military construction projects that are ready to go as far as 1391. We do need PD to further refine those projects. What we basically did is I did is stop the money going from the West Coast and the Pacific and float it all to Camp Lejeune. So there's projects that are health and safety issues, runway repairs, gas line repairs in Camp Lejeune. They all basically came to a stop to do the right thing to help Camp Lejeune and the East Coast. But unless we get additional money, those projects that are critical projects and are not like to have projects will not be able to restart. We have several bids in third and fourth quarter that will expire for the rest of the region. So that's impacting the entire Marine Corps. Operations, I think we made a kind of a quick recovery down in Camp Lejeune. But if I can just name a couple of kind of anecdotal stories, there's a control tower, a range tower at Cherry Point that controls all the airspace for the ranges. That's been decimated. So those people now are working in a makeshift facility. So that has an impact. You have young Marines who work on aircraft, and now they have to be moved into another hangar and double up. Aviation maintenance is critical. Now that's going to affect aviation maintenance just because it affects the quality of life of the Marines. And then if you just kind of take the overall quality of life of the Marine sailors and families, if you have to PCS to Camp Lejeune, you're away from your family plenty of times because of war or deployments. If you have to now leave them at Camp Pendleton to go there because of shortage of housing and such, that just has greater impacts or long-term impacts, I think, on the health of the Corps and retention and things like that. And that's just a few of many stories. If I could just leave you one more, there's a building in Cherry Point that all our counselors work out of for family counseling, substance abuse, and all, and that pretty much was decimated. Now we have counselors shoved in all different nooks and crannies around Cherry Point. And what's happening? People aren't going to counseling because those services aren't readily available. So those kind of things are just anecdotal stories, sir.
Very good. General Allen, a similar question. You are suffering the same thing. Can you tell us how that's affecting you?
Thank you, sir.
As far as self-financing, trying to self-finance as we go
Yes,
forward.
sir. Understand. First, let me thank the subcommittee for the reprogramming request that you all passed. General Colony's mentioned it in his statement, but for the Air Force, that was $200 million in O&M, which is very helpful this fiscal year 19. Our requirement at Tyndall for O&M is $750 million in fiscal year 19. $550 million of that has already been cash flowed from other places where the O&M was programmed. And on top of that, we need $150 million in MILCON planning and design to be ready for the MILCON rebuild that will be ready in fiscal year 20. So that's the magnitude of what we're dealing with at Tyndall. If you factor in where we think we may be with Offutt as a result of the flooding on the Missouri River here in the last month, that number could grow to over $1 billion total that we need to be looking at cash flowing. So without an additional relief this fiscal year, our comptroller has put together a proposal for our secretary that essentially involves a triage of how we manage O&M to get us through the rest of the fiscal year. So to your question, if we have to invoke that triage plan, we'll have to really stop new recovery activity at Tyndall, probably in the May timeframe. And in the Offutt timeframe, we'll do the same in recovery, or I'm sorry, at Offutt Air Force Base, we'll do the same in recovery there to slow down that recovery. In addition, about $270 million of O&M FSRM projects that won't be awarded until after the 1st of May will just be deferred into the next fiscal year. So that's about 62 projects. And then also our weapon system sustainment accounts, the accounts that we use to maintain airplanes, will be impacted, as will flying hours later in the fiscal year. So just an idea of some of the impacts that are resulting from the cash flow.
Thank you. Senator Schatz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary McMahon, I want to start with this $7.2 billion, and I want to make sure we have at least a similar understanding of what's being asked for. Here's the way I understand it, just in colloquial terms. If we can go as quick as possible, that'd be great. The first 3.6 is essentially backfilling, and the second 3.6 is sort of forward funding, running the same play in the next fiscal year. Is that about right?
Yes, sir, with $2 billion going towards hurricane relief as well.
Out of the
9.2.
okay, so sorry. 3.6 backfill, 3.6 forward funding, running the same play, and then $2 billion for hurricane relief. Okay.
Yes, Senator, that's correct.
Okay. So, Acting Secretary Shanahan has asked Chairman Dunford to give his military advice on projects that can be cut for border wall construction. So who else provides input into this process?
Senator, first, rather than cut, I would use the word deferred, as we have committed since day one on this. No projects will be cut. It's simply deferring. We've got a process defined that no project that is scheduled to be awarded in 2019, fiscal year 2019, will not be impacted.
Okay, rather than quibble with you about language, who else is providing input into what will be moved to the right? And in my view, if it moves to the right, it may fall off. But we'll have that conversation offline because it's longer. How does this process work? Who gives the input? And I'll give you a couple of questions. Who gives the input? Are the service secretaries and chiefs developing prioritized lists to give to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs? And does this process provide sort of for a pass back? In other words, can all of the people at this panel argue, I think persuasively, that there's just no room, for instance, in the Air Force MILCON budget to free up $100 million or $700 million or whatever it may be for the wall, given natural disasters, deployments, urgent needs? You paint a picture of pretty urgent needs and some unexpected expenses. And so the question is, are you in a position, are these individuals in a position to push back?
Senator, to the first part of your question, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs provides independent advice to the acting secretary as to whether or not there are any projects that were presented by the Department of Homeland Security meet the requirements that we can utilize 2808 funding.
Right, but does the information flow from the service branches to Chairman Dunford?
That is a determination looking at the list of projects that were provided by DHS back to the Department of Defense. It does not talk about specific MILCON projects. To that part of the question, each of the services and a list of all of the unawarded projects have been provided to the Congress. Within that list, they now have the opportunity, if there is a requirement, no requirement's been defined yet.
They meaning the services?
The services
Okay.
have an integral play. The four ladies and gentlemen to my left are the ones that initiate that process, working through their service secretaries.
Right, but do they get a target dollar amount to go and find, or is it their discretion to say, listen, I can only free up 28 million, or are they ordered each to find some dollar amount, and how does that work?
Senator, beyond at this point in time, that's a level of detail that, quite frankly, we're not down to yet as to what projects across the four services would actually be tagged, because today there is no requirement, because the chairman of the Joint Chiefs has yet to define if any of the projects presented meet the minimum requirements to be funded under 2808.
So that's a fair answer. We're not there yet because you have to. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs has to interact with the Department of Homeland Security and so on, pursuant to the statute. I get it. You can just see how this puts us in at a minimum, an awkward position. But to put a finer point on it, it is quite difficult to fund additional requirements, right? And to do what we normally do, which is to listen to you, to trust you, and then to lay down money for those needs when there's $9-odd billion that is sort of not just outside of the regular order, but outside of our ability to even see it, right, at this point. And so this creates great difficulty for the committee to do its job in the normal fashion. And I understand, you didn't initiate this process. You may not even like this process. I don't want you to comment on that. But it does create difficulty when you're talking about bases and installations that have been essentially destroyed, and you need help. My view is I'm staring at this $7.2 billion and say, well, there's some money, right? And I would argue, especially from this committee, that $7.2 billion ought to be used for these needs and not the wall. And if we decide as a Congress to fund the wall, we should do it the old-fashioned way. We should fund a wall. We don't want to fund milk on to some high amount and then let the money get raided because no one wants to admit that they're funding a wall. I'll come back for a second round.
Senator Murkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Bingham, I want to address my first question to you and to the three of you who will be retiring. Just let me add my thanks and appreciation for your years of service. This is regards to infrastructure readiness and the initiative that is being pursued in Alaska called the Alaska Infrastructure Readiness Initiative. This is to look at urgent unfunded needs, and the senior leaders in U.S. Army Pacific are working a similar initiative in Hawaii. And what we're looking at in Alaska are things like indoor heated storage and maintenance facilities for the Stryker, need for adequate indoor facilities to conduct physical training in cold conditions, improvements to J Park to improve the training. Can you speak to me just very quickly here about whether or not we're on track with this initiative to really help advance what the senior leadership team is looking to and how we can address these unfunded needs in infrastructure?
Thank you, Senator Murkowski. I appreciate your question. I can tell you that we are aware of several of those projects, future projects or program for Alaska. We are looking forward to working with General Brown and the USRPAG team on what he will bring into the building as it relates to that initiative you described.
And so do you think that this is something that there can be an agreement specific to this initiative, not unlike what I understand is being pursued in Hawaii now?
I'm not the decision-making authority on that, your question, but we will certainly take that back to the building as you've asked me.
Well, I appreciate that. And as you do that, I would like you to look at one of these issues that I have just raised, which is this warm storage for the Stryker vehicles there at Fort Wainwright. We've got a situation where we just don't have warm storage. You've got 7-month winter season. It takes about 72 hours of winter maintenance before they can basically get warmed up to be ready to respond, which is a challenge, most notably. So I guess the question is whether or not Congress might be able to fund a temporary solution through the Army procurement accounts in 2020, and whether or not we can work with you to address this in the short term before we can get to that longer term solution.
Again, thank you so much for your question. Though I'm not the decision-making authority, we certainly recognize the need, and I look forward to working with you and your team on the issue that you just raised.
Well, I appreciate that. It is a priority for us up north, so thank you for that. This is a question for you, Vice Admiral Smith and General Congolese. Earlier this morning in the Armed Services Committee, Senator Sullivan was able to pose a question to the Secretary of the Navy, and I also understand to the Commandant. And this relates to the prospects of ADAC as an opportunity for Marine training activities. Secretary Spencer was up in the state with Senator Sullivan last year, was very interested in helping to facilitate operations in this area. ADAC, as you all know, has been relatively quiet in many decades, but the potential there for training opportunities and also with existing infrastructure, I think, is quite promising. Do you, either one of you, have anything that you would care to add to what was already discussed this morning? And I guess more specific to this committee is what would the funding look like for us as the Appropriations Committee to consider what a training opportunity for the Marines out in ADAC would be?
Senator, thanks for the question. I wish I listened to the testimony. I'd be better prepared for what the commandant said. I'm not sure what he said. So,
He was all positive and all good, so just bring it on.
well, then whatever he said, I doubled down.
There you go.
But I would tell you that the commandant, in every discussion he has about our facilities or wherever we're located, it's always about training. Whether it's Hawaii or in the Pacific or everywhere we're at, I mean, every day there's a question about training. If we cannot train, there's no sense in us being there. And I know he's very open-minded. He's talked about Alaska and the opportunities, part of Pacific, obviously. And so he's definitely open-minded and talked about it. I have no idea about costs or funding or what the requirement would be. But I know the commandant's definitely open-minded about using Alaska and training in Alaska.
Vice Admiral Smith?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Senator. I know that we're looking at what's the art of the possible up in Alaska. ADAC is one of those things. There's no final decisions yet, but again, we're seeing what the art of the possible is because, to the General's comment, where we can do training and where we can leverage opportunity for increased and advanced training, especially where we are in great power competition and what is up there in Alaska, we're going to go see what we can do, ma'am.
Well, we'd certainly welcome you up to get more eyes on the situation, but we think that we have a pretty good opportunity again for training areas as well as infrastructure there. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Udall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, all of you, for being here, and very much appreciate your service. The Department of Defense, the New Mexico Congressional Delegation, and the Appropriations Committee worked hard to get several MILCOM projects which support national security needs, including an information systems facility at White Sands Missile Range. This project will enable White Sands to continue the missile defense, hypersonics, and other tests that are vital to national security. Furthermore, military construction projects like this one have already been approved by Congress but are at risk of being sacrificed for the President's ill-advised border wall. These MILCOM projects were all requested in your budgets. So I think we can safely assume you support them and believe they are important to military needs. Is that correct? Is it just yes? It looks like everybody's nodding. So I'm going to say for the record, we're all on yes there. And I've introduced legislation that would reiterate and make crystal clear that we intended these funds to go to these projects and prevent MILCOM funding from being raided for a southern border wall. Would anyone here oppose Congress including language like that on future appropriations bills to protect MILCOM project funding from being taken? Mr. Mahan?
Senator, clearly every project that comes before this subcommittee is important to the services and important to the department. It is a matter of priorities within the Department of Defense through the President, who's the Commander-in-Chief, of how best to utilize that based upon the actions of the Senate and the Congress.
Yeah, well, I just hope, and I think this was said by several other members earlier, that the advocates here for the military know and understand, the career people here, how important and how hard you've worked over the years to devise a process for MILCOM to go forward. And now to have, and what you were really preventing a lot of that was the politics of it, of trying to get it in to be a solid process. And now we have the politics of the White House in the middle of this. So I just hope all of you, when you get asked, as Senator Schatz was talking about, what you feel ought to go forward, that you push back. I realize what you can and can't say here, but it's very important for you to speak up in terms of what is a national security need and what isn't. Let me ask about hypersonic testing. I know General Bingham knows this well, this hypersonic testing at White Sands Missile Range, including a point-to-point testing envisioned by the Air Force for transportation and space research and development based out of the Space Rapid Capabilities Office at Kirtland Air Force Base, is an important next step toward developing a hypersonic capability. Is the Air Force or Army considering future MILCOM at White Sands to support these needs? Either.
Well, thank you for the question, Senator Udall. And as you know, having commanded White Sands Missile Range for nearly 2 years, it's absolutely a national treasure. I will tell you that White Sands is playing a key role in implementing hypersonic test flight. We've been actively engaged in OSD's Test Resource Management Center to explore long-range flight corridors, and I suspect that will continue into the near future.
General Allen, anything from the Air Force perspective on that?
Senator, I'll just say I don't have any hypersonic-related MILCON in the Future Years Defense Plan right now, but that very well could change in the future.
Great, thank you.
Senator, if I could add one comment
please,
to
go
that.
ahead.
One of the things we recognize is the potential encroachment in the northern areas above White Sands. We've taken action working with local developers and some of the power companies to ensure, to the best of our ability, that encroachment will not take place because we recognize it to be a national treasure.
Yeah, and we're working on that with you, I believe. Thank
Yes,
you
sir.
very
Thank you.
much. You know, military families in New Mexico and live in privatized military housing have communicated concerns about the dilapidated conditions and health issues in their homes, which include health issues like lead paint, black mold, pesticide use. I understand, responding to this, that you all the DOD is working to propose a tenant Bill of Rights. What will this Bill of Rights entail, and how will it address the needs of military families?
Senator, if I might, for my colleagues, they're intimately involved with this, as are their assistant secretaries with my staff. Very simply, what we're trying to do is ensure that what's occurred over the last couple of years doesn't happen again. It gives a greater voice to our residents. The Bill of Rights specifically talks about protecting them, providing them with an understanding of what they should expect from our privatized partners, as well as a methodology by which, if they have an issue, that issue can be resolved. In general terms, that's what we're looking at, but provides in clear guidance, oh, by the way, that our private partners have agreed to, and tomorrow I'll meet with many of the families' organizations to make sure they're comfortable with that as well.
Yeah, and when you visit with these young families and how dedicated they are to the service to the country, it's just so discouraging and disheartening to hear them describe some of the conditions in this housing. So I hope that we can all get on the same page and make sure that we're going to invest and make sure this doesn't happen again. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank all of you for your service, but particularly the three of you who will be retiring. We're very grateful. Admiral Smith, speaking of national treasures, another national treasure is in the state of Maine. It's the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard, as I'm sure you know. It plays a crucial role in ensuring that the Navy's submarines are able to accomplish their missions worldwide. Last year, the Navy requested and Congress appropriated $162 million for three very important military construction projects at the shipyard, including the vital Dry Dock No. 1 Superflood Basin Improvement, a portal crane rail extension project, and the replacement of a consolidated warehouse. Completing these projects on schedule will ensure that the shipyard can dock both Los Angeles-class and Virginia-class submarines and to execute Los Angeles-class service life extensions by fiscal year 2021. These projects now have award dates before September 30th. Do you anticipate executing these projects on schedule?
Thank you, Senator. I appreciate that. And yes, that shipyard's phenomenal. It does great work up there. As you know, I've had the opportunity to visit it on more than one occasion, and it's a great workforce and a great team up there. At this point, we are on track to award those three MILCONs, ma'am.
Thank you. That will come as a great relief, and is so important to the Navy as well. I want to follow up on the senator from New Mexico's concerns about the reports of substandard housing for our military families. I've been very concerned about a report that was published in seacoastonline.com talking about black mold, vermin, and lead paint at a particular housing apartment building, really, called Admiralty Village, which houses 200 military families who work at the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard and in other military capacities in the Seacoast region. The descriptions are very troubling. I don't think it's fair to ask you to respond on the fly to the specific allegations in this story. I would note that the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard recently held a town hall and offered all residents an inspection, and that is certainly a good first step. What I do want to do is to provide you with a copy of this story, which has much more in-depth reporting, and to ask you to respond. This is an example of an apartment building that I believe was originally built by the Navy but then privatized, and it just has not been kept up to the standards that all of us would want for our military families. So I will submit this to you as part of a record question with the permission of the chairman and ask you to specifically respond.
Yes, ma'am, absolutely. Obviously, the care and the feeding of our sailors and their families is of the utmost importance. We have learned a lot here, as we all have stated. I have not seen that specific article, and so I look forward to seeing it. And the more information we can get on where we are in housing and reality, and from different perspectives, to enable us to get after this aggressively, is more than welcome. So I look forward to reading that and getting back to you, ma'am.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Schatz. I am concerned that the DOD is not addressing important readiness issues for no other reason than the President has directed billions of dollars from our defense budget to be used for a wall that he promised Mexico would pay for. General Bingham, your 2020 budget includes $211 million reserve fund to address the dangers within military housing. And if there's a need for this spending, I don't understand why it should wait a year unless it's because the Army can't afford it because of the funds that are being spent on the wall. And Admiral Smith, we have heard estimates that the shortfall in ship depot maintenance in this year alone is in the hundreds of millions of dollars and perhaps approaching $1 billion. And it doesn't seem clear if there is a strategy to fund these needed repairs in light of how much is being spent on the wall. General Colonies, the Marine Corps reports that there is a $451 million shortfall to address hurricane damage at Camp Lejeune and Cherry Point. A reprogramming could solve this shortfall in a matter of days. It's why General Neller wrote his memo raising alarms about the readiness and fiscal solvency of the Marine Corps. The only reason I can think of for not providing the Marine Corps with a second reprogramming is because of the amount of funding being provided for the wall. And General Allen, the Air Force reports an $899 million shortfall this year for repair of Tyndall and Offutt Air Force bases. And again, it seems like this could be quickly addressed by a reprogramming, except that billions in defense funds are being spent on the wall. So Congress has not been presented with a request from the President to fund the disaster costs that are burdening the Marine Corps and the Air Force. reprogramming dollars are being prioritized for the wall and not your readiness concerns. My question for the panel is simple. What is your plan for dealing with these costs and when they are clearly taking a back seat to the wall?
Senator, if I might start, and then I'll let my partners respond as they need to. First, many of the things that you've identified here are significant issues exacerbated by the weather issues that we had last year with both at Tyndall and Camp Lejeune. The challenges that we face in many cases are O&M issues, vice military construction funding issues. And so part of the effort with the reprogramming that we went through was to resolve that. That resolves in part some of the issue for fiscal year 2019, but it clearly, as you've heard in testimony thus far today, does not take care of all of the issues that we'll face in 2019. I am not privy at this point to know whether or not the department, through the president, will submit a supplemental, but clearly there is a requirement out there, as is there across the board for disaster relief. With regards to military construction, I think there's a recognition within the department that there is a need for additional dollars to be able to both support the wall and other issues. The approach that we've taken coming before the Congress is an attempt to recognize that there is a near-term requirement as well as a back funding that would be requested. And I think the appropriations that, or the President's request that came forward recognizes that we can't do without that $3.6 billion that we requested and that you approved and authorized in 2019, but we are requesting that it be back funded in 2020.
Does anyone else wish to make any comments? If not, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Our distinguished Vice Chairman of Appropriations, Senator Leahy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I've also had a concern about the money that's being transferred for the border wall, especially as we've had a number of votes on this. As you know, when the Congress voted overwhelmingly to give $1.6 billion for the wall, the president vetoed that bill, saying it wasn't enough, closed down the government for 35 days, cost us tens of billions of dollars, but then signed the bill for $1.3 billion. Well, I couldn't figure that out and why that happens. There was a congressional vote on what it was, Republicans and Democrats. Now I worry that money is being taken to a backdoor way to build the wall. With a son who trained at Camp Lejeune, and I look at the damage to Camp Lejeune, and I've talked with him and with friends of mine who trained there also. I might ask, General, do you have enough money to put Camp Lejeune back where it should be?
Senator, good seeing you again. No, sir. We need the $451 million as comment on, as testified this year for FY19 and O&M money, and that's just for repairing things. We've asked for $2 billion in military construction for 31 projects, and that's 31 military construction projects that replaces actually 133 buildings at Camp Lejeune, New River, and Cherry Point.
I know that area well. I emphasize my son who trained there. I didn't train there. I don't think I ever would have made it through, even with my Italian half. Secretary McMahon, on March 7th, I joined Senators Schatz and Durbin, Udall, others, Democratic members of the subcommittee, to a letter to Acting Secretary Shanahan asking that he provide a list of projects deemed less important than building a wall along the southern border that could be put at risk in order to pay for the wall. We haven't gotten a response. When will we be told which projects will be deferred or canceled in order to fund the wall?
Senator,
And why they're less important?
Senator, where we are in the process today is that the next step is for the acting secretary to request feedback from the chairman of the Joint Chiefs as to whether any of the efforts being requested do in fact meet the criteria necessary for 2808 funding. Once we understand whether or not there is a requirement that can be supported, we'll work with the services to have them identify which projects could be deferred. We've provided some initial guidance.
Which projects could be deferred because they're less important than the wall?
Right now, today, Senator, what we've done is identify that any project that is scheduled to be awarded in fiscal year 2019 is taken off of that list, and a project that would be is scheduled not to be awarded until fiscal year 2020 would be one of those considered. Each of the services will look at that criteria, but the intent and the belief being that with the support of the Congress, that funding would be backfilled that for any project that would be.
But that doesn't, as you know, that doesn't really answer my question. We're told this is beginning right now, and that we have to take this money right now to build this wall because of the pressure in the United States. You don't have a list of what can be canceled right now to pay for the wall. Is that correct?
That is correct, Senator.
Thank you. And I appreciate that. I was encouraged to see the Army include a replacement for the Mountain Warfare School within the unfunded priorities list. The current facility is nearly 40 years old. And I'll submit some questions with record on this. Obviously, I'll support a replacement. And as the Army undertakes long-term effort to relocate and rebuild National Guard readiness centers, let's make sure, and I know, General Bingham, I know you've been concerned about this, that we're making sure that they meet all standards, regardless of gender, that they're being incorporated in their design and readiness. And will you assure me of that, please?
I can. Thank you.
Thank you. Chairman, thank you for letting me step in. I apologize. We have, it's a busy day in the Appropriations Committee. We're also holding a hearing with the Secretary of State just up the hall on his budget. But thank you all. I know most of you well, and thank you for being here.
Thank you. Senator Daines.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I can tell you in Montana, we're very proud of the men and women of the 341st Missile Wing. They work very hard each day to maintain our nuclear arsenal, those ICBMs, make sure that the highest state of readiness. I want to be sure from the onset that we aren't doing them a disservice with hyperbole and loose rhetoric about crumbling infrastructure for perhaps political purposes. Secretary McMahon, if our missileers got the call tonight, are you confident their systems will perform as expected?
Senator, after 34 years in the United States Air Force, I know they are.
Thank you. I'm confident as well. And would you agree that our military installations are improving today as a result of increased investment in defense and a renewed focus by this administration on the threats facing our nation?
Senator, they are. We have a long ways to go. There's still risk, but we're making the effort, and over the last couple of years, we've done very well in being able to reduce that risk.
For FY20, the President's requested $235 million to update the structures where nuclear munitions are stored and maintained at Malmstrom Air Force Base. I feel confident the White House and the Senate both understand the value of maintaining a credible nuclear deterrent. But some of our colleagues in the House seem a bit more naive or perhaps just simply uncooperative. General Allen, how damaging would a continuing resolution be to the Air Force's modernization strategy if the House and the Senate can't reach an agreement by October 1st?
Thank you, Senator. Well, it delays our recovery. So in my opening remarks, I talked about this FY20 budget request would be a considerable increase over FY19. So absent that FY20 appropriation, we won't have that considerable increase in funding to begin that recovery, to include the $235 million WGF facility at Malmstrom.
Thank you. And I know the Air Force is working diligently on Malmstrom's missile maintenance facility, which was slightly delayed. Are we back on track now to have a contract in place this summer?
Yes, Senator. That was we were working diligently to get an above threshold reprogramming request through, and I understand that came to the Hill today.
Okay.
We're on target for a June of 19 award for that
Great.
project.
Thank you. Last year, I was pleased that this committee was able to accelerate the much-needed ramp expansion at the Great Falls International Airport, where our Guard C-130s operate. I understand the design is currently about 70% complete. General Allen, by all indications, this project appears to be moving along and should be completed on schedule. Would you agree with that assessment?
Yes, Senator. We're looking at September for award.
Thank you. And with the natural disasters we saw in 2018, whether it's Montana wildfires to Gulf Coast hurricanes, how can Congress help the Air Force hedge against the risk of unforeseen expenses?
Sir, I would say right now our O&M requirements in fiscal year 19 are our highest priority in general recovering from severe weather. Is that answering your question?
It does, yeah. Thank you.
Senator, may I pile on for just a second
Yeah.
to that question? I think one of the most important issues that for the department as well as for our Congress is how do we create resilient installations? We've talked a little bit about weather, we've talked a little bit about a climate, but it's a much broader issue than that gets into cyber, it gets into water, it gets into energy. And I think with the Congress, I would encourage us together to figure out how we take a more holistic approach to ensuring that our installations are fully resilient. Thank you for letting me.
You bet. Thank you. Thanks for that comment. In summary, in General Allen, I appreciate your time last week. I was glad we could discuss some of the readiness and the quality of life issues facing our airmen. As you know, Montana can get kind of cold there in the wintertime. We had some 40-degree below kind of weather this past winter. To maintain the Air Force's physical standards in those conditions, you've got to have adequate facilities. For years, the indoors fitness center there at Malmstrom Air Force Base has lagged behind other northern tier bases, but there's never seems to be enough funding to bring it up to an acceptable standard. The fitness center is a priority for the military serving in Malmstrom. General Allen, I ask you continue to work with us to get Malmstrom the improvements it needs and make this a higher priority in the Air Force.
Senator, based on our conversation, I asked my staff to reach out to the installation, which they've done. We'll continue to work with the wing, and if it'll help you, we'll be happy to come over and spend more time with your staff to talk about that project.
Thank you, General Allen. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. We've talked about lots of really important things today. A couple of members have already brought it up, but I think maybe one of the most important things that we talked about was the privatized housing and the problems that we've had. And so what I would like to know is we've got this challenge. I'd like to know, and we'll start with you, General Bingham. I'd like to know if this has changed the service's attitude as far as who's responsible. When somebody complains, what are we going to do? I mean, who's responsible? Not in the past, it seems like we have maybe not been as good as we should be. Tell me how it's changed the services.
And thank you, Chairman Bozeman, for your question. I will tell you, first and foremost, we want to assure our service members and their families that we absolutely care for their well-being. We want them to feel safe and know that they're in safe housing. And so to that end, we are sparing no effort to make sure that this partnership called Residential Communities Initiative works as it was intended to do. To that end, we are putting commanders and leaders back in the process associated with hearing the voice of our service member and families as residents inside of that. And we know that's important. It's not a one-time fire and forget. This is a continual process. And as I mentioned in my opening remarks, we want to make sure that we put in place processes and procedures that are enduring, because our service members and their families so deserve all of that. And I think one of the major takeaways is really trying to recapture and regarner the trust from our families and our service members, because what makes a ready service member is making sure that he or she does not have to worry about their families. Housing is very important to them and to us as leaders, and we want to reassure them that we are trustworthy stewards of them and all that make them the ready service members that we aim for them to be. Thank you for your question.
Anybody else got anything to add? Or
Mr. Chairman, we are clearly in a better place because of PPV housing. Having said that, we also clearly took our eye off the ball, and we have a responsibility to our sailors and their families to make sure that if they're having issues, we support them. As you know, the CNO directed 100% contact of all our families to understand what their issues are and concerns. He addressed small unit leadership, our chief petty officers and our division officers, to know and advocate for their sailors. When that doesn't work, the chain of command advocate for them. So you asked, has it changed us? What is different? We have refocused, doubled down on our responsibilities to take care of our men and women, sir.
very good. Does the fiscal year 2020 request include adequate funding to mitigate and address what we want to do with the issues? Mr. McMahon.
Senator, what I would tell you is that we are able to work some of the non-privatized housing issues. Quite frankly, one of the challenges that we face is an O&M shortfall, an unfunded request requirement for additional manpower within our housing offices, which is one of the key issues that we identified as a root cause problem of where we are today. Support from the Congress for that funding, I think, would assist us to be able to get our housing offices back to where we'd like them to be. Thank you for the question.
Well, let us help you with that. I mean, we look, as far as I'm concerned, you're responsible for getting this fixed. And on the other hand, let us help. I think I can speak for the committee. This is something you heard from both sides. I mean, this is something that we're all very, very concerned about. So be sure and let us know how we can help so that we truly can fix this. Senator Tester?
Well, first of all, thanks you all for being here, and Mr. Chairman, I appreciate you taking some time so I can get back here. Thank you very much. I'll be very, very quick because I think most of what I have in my portfolio to ask has already been asked. But this is a really important question for you, General Allen, that I think Senator Daines touched upon. It deals with mission recapitalization, which I think we both can agree on that there's very urgent, especially as it applies to our nuclear enterprise. And so I am glad to see that the weapons storage facility at Malmstrom is included in this budget request. It's a project that I've been advocating for, that the base needs, that the airmen need at Malmstrom, and I can't wait for construction to begin. The question as it applies to this budget, though, is I'm concerned about possibly these dollars getting reprogrammed, creating a potential another delay for obvious reasons. And I know that many people have spoken about dollars taken out of the military budget to be used for a wall on the southern border. I think, quite frankly, that's a mistake. We're taking one security measure and making it weaker by trying to beef up another one. So I guess my question is can you assure me that these dollars will stay in the budget, that if the president asks for dollars, that you will say, no, this is too important for our nuclear enterprise to put off any longer?
Senator, I can't give an assurance of what will happen should that project be appropriated, but I can assure you that I understand and advocate for its mission importance for all the reasons that you said.
Well, I would just say that, and I know the president is a commander-in-chief, and I know that there are rules that have to be put forth here, but I've been down the southern border, and I've been at Malmstrom Air Force Base. And I understand what's going on relatively well on the southern border after spending 2 days down there. And I understand relatively well what's going on Malmstrom Air Force Base. This facility's been on the books for a while now. You know that. I mean, and what's more important than weapon storage? And this isn't talking about storing 22 rifles. This is nuclear weapons. And so I would just say do what you can do to push back to make sure these projects move forward. They're that important.
Yes, Senator, I agree. And it's a good project. It's a long time coming. It is pegged to the work we did at F.E. Warren for the same kind of a project, site adapted for the conditions in Montana. Yeah. We're very comfortable that it'll be ready to go when the money comes.
And thank you. The only thing I'd also ask you to do is hold those contractors' feet to the fire. I think we're building these in phases to save money, and it distresses me when the next one's going to cost more than the last one, not less. Thank you very much.
Senator Schatz.
Thank you. Secretary McMahon, on this $7.2 billion in particular, I understand where we are in the process. Do we have your commitment to keep us informed? Let's start with that.
Senator, as we move forward in the process, we will keep you informed at the different gates that we reach. If a project is selected to be deferred, that information will flow to the Senate and to the Congress as well.
There's sort of two ways to do this. First of all, I trust you. And so I don't want to nail this down to every 10 days you write me a letter. But if we're not going to do sort of a time certain update, which I'm comfortable with, then we have to be comfortable that if anything significant happens that is relevant to the jurisdiction of this committee, that you will not wait 2 or 3 weeks to tell us. Because my sense of this is that the DHS and the Joint Chiefs piece of this is the rate limiting factor. And then after that, things may move relatively quickly. So if we're on a recess for a week and you just wait for the next, oversight hearing, that does not count as keeping us informed. So do I have your commitment to keep us informed as we go along, anytime anything significant happens, and erring on the side of informing us, that you will keep us abreast of every significant step in this process?
Senator, what I'd like to do is, rather than just give an unqualified yes, is take that question for the record, go back and make sure that it's clear in all our collective minds how best to communicate with the Congress to ensure that we are transparent and keep you informed. If I could do that, sir.
I mean, I don't love that answer, I have to tell you. I think it's not this isn't a gotcha. I'm not saying give us a letter every Friday to tell you where you're at. I'm just telling you that in terms of maintaining this working relationship, we ought to be informed if anything major happens. Now, if something's classified or whatever, we can sort of deal with that. But it seems reasonable that you ought to be able to tell us what's happening as we go along.
Senator, in the short answer to your question is yes, it's reasonable that we would do that. What I want to make sure is that what you think is significant and what the department thinks is significant, rather than to commit something that is beyond my ability.
Fair enough. And this is why I trust you, is because when you say yes, you want to be sure that you can follow through on this. I want to just a couple of other topics. Climate change, extreme weather, severe weather. We've clearly been hit in each of the services, and it's costing us a lot of money. So without sort of getting into a solution set, is it fair to say severe weather is costing the Department of Defense more money over the last couple of years than it was previously? And what ought we to do about that? I think you know a fair amount about resilience. I'm not satisfied that as, say, General Allen has sort of immediate needs to get back up and running, that he has the time to develop a plan for a new Air Force base that is resilient in the context of climate change. So how do we make adjustments on the fly? Because some of this, we can't do a 5-year plan, but still sort of meet our needs.
Senator, there's probably both a short-term and a long-term answer to your question. For example, at Tyndall Air Force Base, I know the Air Force has taken an approach that said, what is it that we build long-term resilience into the installation to get it to where it needs to be based upon weather and climate and the impact that that they have had. On a longer term, as we build new facilities, what we're looking at is an entirely different set of standards than what we've used in the past that say, how do we ensure that there's resilience in the installations based upon the standards that we're using for actually building it. And
Are those standards written yet, or you're developing them?
in many cases, those are written. They exist today. In some cases, they're evolving as we move forward.
Do they differ among the services?
I don't know the answer to that question. I think they're the same.
So, Senator, I would say that the lens we use probably now that's most significant is the mission assurance lens in it. So we do assessments, and the correlation and the relationship of power, water, key structures and facilities, the information, we have a good portion of that information. What we need to do and what we're trying to do is take action on that information. So understand the interdependencies and the relationships, and Florence taught us a lot, whether it's a control tower that controls air for North Carolina, or a power station that's a single feed or something like that to an installation. We realize what the interdependents are, and we need to invest in those interdependents to make sure we have the resiliency to withstand whether it's natural disaster, cyber, or a DISCA type of event.
Senator, the only thing I would add that as we talk about this in the future with you, and we need to do that, is that we take that holistic approach to installation resilience, and we look beyond just weather and climate, but we look at cyber, we look at water, we look at energy, to take that holistic approach to ensure that if we fix one, we don't leave ourselves vulnerable.
Right,
to
and the beauty of the electricity piece is that it has really encouraging implications forward. And so some of what's being done at the Joint Bases Pearl Harbor and Hickam and other places across the country, are not just science projects, but things that we can use to save lives and money over time. So I'm pleased to see progress in this area. I'd like to be as supportive as I can of this, and also I'd just like to understand what the new policies are, and so that I can lay eyes on them as we go along.
Senator, let me take that question for record and get with you and your staff offline and share with you some of that information.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all again for being here. We really do appreciate you and appreciate all of your efforts. I hope we can continue to work very closely together as we try and solve the various challenges that we face. And there's been a great record of that in the past, and again, in a very bipartisan manner on the committee. To our retirees, General Bingham, Admiral Smith, General Cullinase, thank you, and then, as importantly, thank you to your families. This definitely is a family affair, and we do appreciate your service and sacrifice through the years. For members of the subcommittee, any questions for the record should be turned into the subcommittee staff no later than Friday, April 19th. And with that, the hearing's adjourned.